little bit hazy, a little bit cloudy for SpaceX as they're preparing to launch their Falcon 9 rocket today.
Section in High Bay 3. Non-essential personnel cleared 25 foot around the left-hand booster systems tunnel on platform Kilo North for installation of FTS FCDCAs. Section in High Bay 3. Non-essential personnel cleared 25 foot around left-hand booster systems tunnel on Kilo North for installation of FCDCAs.
According to the 45th Weather Squadron, based at Patrick Space Force Base, the forecast for today is, as SpaceX is near the end of their roughly 4 hour long window, hanging around 60% favorable for good launch conditions today's liftoff. Thankfully, the only big impact comes from the cumulus cloud rules, so no fly through precipitation, no high winds or anything like that. Liftoff winds fairly light, trending between 10 to 15 miles per hour. Of course, if SpaceX, for whatever reason, is unable to launch today, they do have another backup opportunity, which is coming up on Saturday, June 14th, with the window opening at 7:18 a.m. Eastern. As things stand at the moment, SpaceX is targeting a liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket at 11:21 a.m. Eastern today, Friday the 13th. That is 1521 UTC for those of you joining around the world. Taking a quick peek at our live chat here, I want to thank channel member Glenn A, who's been with us now as a member at the Mission Specialist level for 20 months. Appreciate you sticking around with us, Glenn. With some kind words, who says, Happy anniversary, Mr. and Mrs. William Robinson Smith. Thank you, Glenn. It's very nice of you. Also, Marcus back again with a $5 super chat this time, who says, Thanks for everything you guys are doing. Absolutely love the coverage. Thanks for your support of it, Marcus. Appreciate you. Just about 51 minutes to go ahead of the planned liftoff time for the Falcon 9 rocket there at Slick 40, or Space Launch Complex 40. Before we go ahead and get into the mode where SpaceX is ready to start tanking the rocket, let's talk about the countdown timeline for the mission and the nominal milestones that we're anticipating in the run up to liftoff. Broadly speaking, the go ahead for the start of fueling a Falcon 9 rocket will come about at the T minus 38-minute mark. SpaceX does its readiness poll electronically as opposed to by voice, as is the case with some companies like Rocket Lab or ULA, for instance. Once the go ahead is given, we'll see the fueling process begin at the T minus 35-minute mark with the loading of RP1, a rocket grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen will begin flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T minus 30 minutes, SpaceX will start loading a cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage. Same will be true on the second stage a few minutes afterwards. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. T minus 23 minutes is when second stage RP1 loading is expected to wrap up. 20 minutes and 50 seconds out, the strong back chill down process begins. We see this manifest here at Pad 40 as the so-called big vent. And that'll start at T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds here at Pad 40. That venting will continue on until about T minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds when we'll see it start to taper off, setting the stage for LOX to start flowing aboard the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket at the 16-minute mark. Moving right along, T minus 7 minutes is when the engine chill sequence will begin. That's when SpaceX starts to flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract sequence get underway. That's when the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings open up, and the transporter erector, or the strong back, will pull back just a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff, at which point it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes before takeoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. Same is true on the second stage, about a minute afterwards, at which point the rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, when we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch 45 seconds before flight. The engine ignition command is issued at T minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Coming up here, once again at 11:21 a.m. Eastern, 15:21 UTC for those around the world, or in just about 47.5 minutes from now. The Falcon 9 first stage booster that is flying today's mission is tail number 1078 in the SpaceX fleet. To date, it has flown a total of 20 times, which, while it doesn't change ahead of the liftoff, our frequent flyer graphic that we have here. Next time around, we show you this after a good liftoff and landing of this booster. It will become the third booster tied for that number 5 spot on this list. So running through those quickly as they currently stand. Remarkably, we'll have that three-way tie between B1076, 77, and 78, which again have all flown 21 times as of right now. More than likely, though, we'll see B1076 break that pattern since it last flew back on February 21st of this year. The other two, of course, B1077 just flew 10 days ago on June 3rd, and that'll be followed up by B1078 coming up here in just about 45 minutes. So unless they are saving B1076 for a particular mission that's a little bit further down the road, or there's an issue with its refurbishment and getting it back into the fleet as a vehicle ready for launch, more than likely we'll see 1076 be the one to break this upcoming three-way tie. With the Vandenberg launch yesterday, here's where SpaceX stands on the year so far. Having launched a total of 72 times so far this year, looking for number 73 coming up in just under 45 minutes now. 72 Falcon 9 or Falcon launches was the total number of missions that were flown just from Florida in 2023. And as you can see, just 2 bars over from this year, 96 total Falcon launches were what SpaceX was able to accomplish in all of 2023. The company is chasing the goal of 170 total missions by the end of 2025. Last month was also quite busy for the Starlink program. Comparing it to the previous months this year, there were 15 Starlink launches in the month of May. That's compared to February, which had 10, April had 9, January had 8, and March had 6. So the Starlink constellation continues to be, of course, the most often flown payload for SpaceX. An important reason why the company is so focused on rapid reusability and getting back to the pad as quickly as possible following each mission. To that end, following the liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket, you'll notice that the transporter erector will come back into the upright position, part of SpaceX's process of turning around its workforce pad as soon as it possibly can. As SpaceX continues to prepare for this launch coming up in just a little more than 42 minutes from now, things are continuing to move along in part over at Launch Complex 39A. As you can see, there are a number of cranes and other support equipment out that have been working continuously on the Starship launch tower there at Launch Complex 39A as the FAA is assessing, along with NASA, approving the Starship rocket to launch from LC-39A up to 44 times annually. Environmental assessments are ongoing out at that pad for that operation. Meanwhile, over on the Cape side at Space Launch Complex 37, work is continuing to evaluate the environmental impacts to support launches of the Starship rocket there. Do have a new T0 for today's mission. We're resetting our countdown clock to reflect it. New liftoff time is 11:29 p.m. or excuse me, a.m. Eastern. The launch window today does extend out to 11:44 a.m. So they do have still some additional opportunities if needed. So as you can see, we've adjusted our countdown clock. We are now back at T minus 48 minutes and 48 seconds. Coming back to our conversation about LC-39A, of course, SpaceX not just busy with future Starship plans and activities, but in the far more immediate future, still aiming to launch the Axiom Mission 4 flight up to the International Space Station in the potentially near future. However, of course, as we learned yesterday, there are some lingering questions with one of the modules on the Russian side of the ISS. The pressure related to a leak is being investigated by Roscosmos, and NASA is working with the Russian Space Agency to determine if it is going to be safe as the station currently is now for the four commercial astronauts that make up the AX-4 mission to head up to the ISS in the, again, hopefully near future. SpaceX conducted a wet dress rehearsal of its Falcon 9 rocket there at the pad yesterday, which, for those of you who are able to see, we had that over on our 24-hour live stream, Launchpad Live. A new launch date has not yet been named by Axiom Space or SpaceX yet, but of course, we'll keep you posted on any further developments that come of this. But it did appear as though the wet dress rehearsal was successful, and the leak that cropped up during the static fire test of this Falcon 9 rocket nearly a week ago, this past Sunday, has been rectified. And so now we're just waiting on things to be given the green light from the ISS perspective, the receiving end of this operation, and we'll be good to go for this mission. Again, we'll keep you posted on the timing. Speaking of keeping you posted on the timing, we're just about 44 and a half minutes away from the current T0 for this Falcon 9 flight from Space Launch Complex 40. just about 42 minutes now on the clock and counting. Want to thank a few folks in the live chat for your support today. Thanks to channel member Shelly R for a $2 super chat, saying happy anniversary. Thank you, Shelly. Chuck Close with a very generous $25 super chat. Thank you, Chuck. Really appreciate that support at that level. George Wilson also with some very kind words saying, Will, you're consistently the very best. I will extend those nice comments out to the full Spaceflight Now team, since this is far from a one-man operation. I also want to thank Joni Mahoney for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. So to our newest 5 channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. And if you haven't already, be sure to thank Joni in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership after the month you were just gifted. As we are once again approaching the point where SpaceX is not only going to be making the call on the start of prop load, let's talk about the payload that is on board today's Falcon 9 flight, the Starlink 12-26 mission. 23 Starlink satellites in total. 13 of those do feature the direct-to-cell capability. Today's launch will be the 54th featuring Starlink satellites as the primary payload, the 53rd dedicated Starlink launch of the year. Of course, Starlink 13-1 did carry 2 Starshield satellites, so that's the reason for the variation there. SpaceX has been launching the optimized version of its Starlink V2 mini satellites for the majority of 2025. Those are considerably lighter, as you can tell by the previous weight of the V2 minis you see there on your screen versus the current weight. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall effect thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. Built up in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle, these will be deployed at about 180 miles or 291 kilometers in altitude at a 43-degree inclination. Now, T minus 36 minutes and counting. Assuming the go ahead was given this go around for start of tanking of the Falcon 9 rocket, that'll begin in just a little more than 30 seconds from now. Want to revisit our conversation about the AX4 mission? Looking back now live at Launch Complex 39A to have a statement from Roscosmos via their Telegram account, as translated from the original Russian. They say in their statement that the leak in the Russian segment of the ISS has, quote, been eliminated, that they continue daily monitoring and maintenance of all systems for the Russian segment of the International Space Station. They conclude the post by stating, I'll quote from the translation. After sealing in June 2025, tests show that the air leak in the transition chamber, that is for the uh, Zvezda service module, has stopped completely for the first time since it was discovered. End quote. It was discovered back in September of 2019. So, per what the Russians are saying, and of course, NASA will have to concur in order to give its blessing for the AX4 mission to move forward and receive the four astronauts of that private astronaut mission. It sounds like things are progressing towards getting this launch back on track. Of course, the solution of the leak doesn't necessarily indicate the root cause of how or why it stopped. And so understanding that is going to be something that will be very important to NASA and its international partners before making the call on allowing AX4 to proceed. So again, we'll continue to monitor this and bring you updates as we're able to learn them throughout either the course of this broadcast or, of course, moving forward on our social channels and website, spaceflightnow.com. Time now, 32 and a half minutes to go ahead of the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Taking a closer look at the base of the vehicle, we're trying to make out through quite a bit of heat distortion and haze, if in fact fueling has begun on the rocket. What we're looking for is the evidence of a bit of a frost line starting to form near the base of the first stage booster. Some vapor should also be visible in that part of the rocket as well. That would indicate that super cold densified liquid oxygen is in fact flowing on board the vehicle. Where we are looking is, if you notice those pair of branches in the part of the tree that is jutting up on the left-hand side of the rocket from our vantage point here. When the wind has them blowing towards the rocket, you can see just to the right of that point, right there. That's the part of the booster where we're looking at for signs of fueling. But again, it's quite difficult today, given all those things I just mentioned about the heat and the haze. And unfortunately, SpaceX does not publicize the start of fueling typically for a Falcon 9 rocket when it's just a Starlink mission, that is. Difficult to discern though it may be, we do believe we're starting to see some frost form on the booster and that aforementioned vapor. Yeah, definitely seeing that now. And that indicates that the Falcon 9 rocket has started tanking, which means SpaceX is locked into the T0 of 11:29 a.m. Eastern, 15:29 UTC. With about 27 and a half minutes to go. If you're just joining us, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starlink 12-26 mission. 23 Starlink satellites getting ready to head up into low Earth orbit. And SpaceX is in the process of tanking its Falcon 9 rocket there at the pad. I want to thank the little more than 1,500 of you who are watching with us live this late morning, now just past the top of the hour. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. The Falcon 9 first stage booster flying on today's mission, Starlink 12-26. It's tail number B1078, which will be flying for a 21st time. Before I get to there, let's go ahead and take a brief trip down memory lane and talk about the missions that this booster has already completed in its past. As is the case with a number of Falcon 9 rockets, this particular booster began with a crew mission. That was the flight of Crew 6 up to the ISS on board the Dragon spacecraft named Endeavour. That was the fourth flight of Dragon Endeavour, lifting off on March 2nd of 2023. That was followed up by a pair of satellites for SES's O3b mPOWER constellation in medium Earth orbit. They lifted off on April 28th of 2023. A group of four Starlink satellite missions were next up for this booster. You had Starlink 6-4 on June 4th, 6-8 on August 7th, 6-16 on September 16th, and Starlink 6-31 on December 3rd. Coming into last year was the flight of the USSF 124 mission, lifting off from Slick 40 with a touchdown over landing zone 2. That mission was followed up by a run of Starlink satellites after that. You had Starlink 6-46 on March 25th, 6-53 on April 23rd, 6-60 on May 28th, 10-2 on June 23rd, 10-6 on August 2nd. That was followed up by a mission for AST Space Mobile and the flight of its first 5 Block 1 Bluebird satellites that launched on September 12th of last year. After that, it's back to Starlink land we go to bring us into the present day. It's Starlink 10-13 on October 30th, 6-76 on November 27th, 12-6 on December 31st, 12-9 on February 8th of this year, 12-16 on March 15th, 6-72 on April 6th, and most recently, you had Starlink 6-84 on Star Wars Day on May the 4th. That brings us to today on Friday the 13th, where in just about 23 and a half minutes, we'll see this Falcon 9 rocket launch once again on the Starlink 12-26 mission. Timeout T minus 20 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. SpaceX has begun to thermally condition the feed lines there at the pad in preparation for second stage LOX load, which means we'll see that visual indication right about now. And there you see the start of the big vent. This venting will continue on until about T minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds. As we approach 17 minutes remaining in the countdown today, we should just have about 60, or excuse me, 30 seconds left on this big event. Second stage LOX load will begin at the 16-minute mark. Coming up on 15 minutes remaining in this countdown timeline. As we're awaiting the flight of this Falcon 9 rocket, let's go ahead and talk about the launch timeline. This is the sequence of events following a good liftoff of the Falcon 9 and in a nominal flight scenario, of course. After takeoff from Space Launch Complex 40, Falcon 9 rocket will begin to throttle its engines back as it passes through max Q, which is the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. After that point, it'll throttle the engines back up and then begin to thermally condition the upper stage engine, the Merlin vacuum engine, ahead of its first burn. There will be then a few events in fairly rapid succession after the 2-minute mark. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, otherwise referred to as MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation and then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine at T plus 2 minutes and 36 seconds. The payload fairings will be deployed just past the 3-minute mark. T plus 6 minutes and 1 second will be the start of the first stage entry burn, lasting just a little under 30 seconds in total. It helps to slow the vehicle down in preparation for the start of the landing burn, which will come about at roughly T plus 7 minutes and 48 seconds, preparing the booster B-1078 to touch down on the drone ship called Shortfall of Gravitas, a little past the 8-minute mark. The Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage will then shut down at T plus 8 minutes and 39 seconds, going into a coast phase until T plus 53 minutes and 59 seconds. There will be a roughly 2-second burn on that upper stage engine, circularizing the orbit and allowing the Starlink satellites to be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 7 seconds post liftoff. Just under 13 minutes to go on this Friday the 13th launch. And ahead of the flight of this Falcon 9 rocket, let's take a moment to talk about the workhorse vehicle for SpaceX. Today's mission set to be the 490th Falcon 9 rocket to head up to orbit so far. Vehicle stands at 70 meters or 229 feet in height, and that's diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Majority of that is made up by the booster. Again, today's tail number is 1078, having flown 20 times up to this point. At the base of the first stage are 9 Merlin engines, which burn a rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship, a Shortfall of Gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. And that image on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the deployed hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the vehicle as it comes back through the atmosphere. Tail first, like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches, which attach to the vehicle's second stage, and at first stage main engine cutoff. High pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Also, the second stage engine nozzle is housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9, powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVac engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle, which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust and will be fired twice on today's flight to place the 23 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. Like with the first stage, the second stage of the Falcon 9 also burns a combination of LOX and RP-1. Following the deployment of those Starlink satellites, there will be one final burn, a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it's designed to burn up and eliminate the risk of creating unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings, currently encapsulating the 23 Starlink satellites. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material and stand at 13.1 meters or 43 feet in height. and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. Following fairing separation, those halves will come back through the atmosphere and then make their final touch or splash down into the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. Once down in the water, a SpaceX recovery vessel will scoop them up, bring them back through Port Canaveral, and then on over to the Hangar X site here at the Kennedy Space Center, where they will be refurbished and turned around for future missions. 9.5 minutes to go before this Falcon 9 rocket is set to take flight from Space Launch Complex 40. Taking a look at the live chat here, I see Florida History Hunter saying lower clouds blocking the view from DeLand, which, yeah, the amount of cloud in the area is not going to make this the most picturesque launch from far off in other parts of Central Florida or over on the Gulf side, unfortunately. But hopefully, for those who are in the more immediate vicinity of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, you'll be able to see at least part of the flight of this Falcon 9 rocket. Or if not, we'll bring you the very best views here in our live stream. We're coming up on 7 minutes ahead of liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. That's the point at which SpaceX will start to flow a little bit of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps to protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. Before we go ahead and see this Falcon 9 rocket fly, let's talk a little bit about where exactly it's going once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Falcon 9 rocket will be making its flight from Space Launch Complex 40 there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. As it does, it will be flying in a southeasterly trajectory once it rockets away from that pad. It'll follow the green arc that you see here on your screen. And at the point of stage separation, the first stage booster will follow the red path there, aiming for a touchdown on the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. This will be the 113th landing for a booster on that particular drone ship if all goes well. That would make it the 373rd booster landing to date on a drone ship, that is. SpaceX will also recover the payload fairings. As mentioned, following their atmospheric reentry, they will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. It will then be brought back onto a recovery vessel and into Port Canaveral, and then onto the Hangar X site as they are readied for their next mission. Speaking of the next mission, we are just 5 minutes and change away from this next mission from Pad 40. Before today, there have been a total of 312 orbital launches from this particular launch site here in Florida. Coming up momentarily, we should have mission audio from SpaceX.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressing for strongback retract.
And lo and behold, there we have it. Also getting pad level views of the rocket. Certainly not looking anywhere near as hazy from a pad deck level perspective as it does from over here at the press lawn.
Strongback retract has started.
And as you just heard, the strong back retract sequence now underway. We'll see the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, otherwise referred to as the strong back, will recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. By the look of it, those Falcon 9 fairing halves look pretty newish to me, so either they are flying for their first time or perhaps they're fairly new into their flight history. SpaceX doesn't often talk about the fairing halves, so we don't have great insight into the history of those as we do into its first stage boosters. Now 3 minutes and counting. At this point, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. We'll hear that call out momentarily from SpaceX, but you'll notice our clock is different from theirs because our clock is in real time and theirs is coming in on a slight delay.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Good call from SpaceX there on stage 1 LOX load. We'll be hearing a similar call regarding second stage LOX load just about the 2 minute mark. Again, we'll hear the call out at the 2 minute mark on the SpaceX timeline of things, but just know that fueling will be complete when we hit 2 minutes and just about 10 seconds from now in real time.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Good call from SpaceX. We're now starting to see the ground gas closeouts. That's the venting that is beginning there from the pad, from the strong back, I should say, at the pad.
Ground gas closeouts.
There's that call and confirmation of that. SpaceX is venting out the remaining liquid oxygen ahead of liftoff. Now T-minus 1 minute and counting. Shortly you'll hear the call for the Falcon 9 rocket being in startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And with that good call, we are now just awaiting the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch.
LD, go for launch.
And with that, SpaceX's go for launch, and we are Coming up on the liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket in about 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff with the Falcon 9 on the Starlink 12-26 mission, and this Falcon 9 has cleared the towers. And some really nice shot callers there. A little more than a minute into flight, Falcon 9 will be throttling back to pass through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Now, a little more than a minute and a half into the mission, SpaceX will be thermally conditioning the Merlin vacuum engine on the upper stage of the rocket ahead of its ignition.
And back shell started.
Coming upon a few events now in fairly rapid succession. Again, we'll see first stage main engine cutoff or MECO at about T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation and then the ignition of that upper stage engine. About 10 seconds to MECO. And MECO. Stage separation. And second stage engine start.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
And back ignition.
Good visuals, good callouts. Coming up on fairing separation in a few seconds. The fairings should have deployed now. A little hard to see with the lighting. You can still just make out the booster as well.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Those occasional puffs we were seeing. Some really nice views of the Florida coastline as we're approaching the 4th minute in this flight in real time. Given the brightness in the cloud cover, we are not expecting to see the entry burn today. Coming up, the next milestone will be the start of that entry burn, though. That's coming up just past the 6-minute mark in this mission. It'll last less than 30 seconds. Falcon booster B1078 appears to have reached its apogee in today's mission, topping out at, now 115 kilometers in altitude for just a hair moment there. Just about a minute away from the start of the first stage entry burn in real time. Again, though, because we are unlikely to see it with our tracking cameras, the time you want to watch for at this point is at the bottom of your screen. On the left-hand side, a view from inside the interstate at the top of the booster. Just a few seconds away now from the start of that entry burn, which again will last less than 30 seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Good call, good visuals. And as you can see from the graphic in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, those three engines are being used for this entry burn to help dramatically slow the vehicle down.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And with the wrap up of that entry burn, we're now looking ahead to the start of the landing burn, which will begin at about T plus 7 minutes and 48 seconds. And that'll cushion the booster for a landing on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas.
Stage 1 transonic.
Stage 1 FTS is saved, and Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And a very picturesque landing of B-1078 today, completing its 21st trip to space and back.
MVAC shutdown.
And with the conclusion of that upper stage engine burn, presumably it will now go into a nominal coast phase until about T plus 53 minutes and 59 seconds. There will then be a roughly 2-second burn on that upper stage engine, which will circularize its orbit and allow the Starlink satellites to be deployed correctly at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 7 seconds post liftoff. As we're getting our launch replays ready for you, want to thank a few folks in the live chat for your support today. Our thanks to Stephen Frazier for gifting 5 Spacefly Now memberships. Really appreciate that generosity, Stephen. Good to see you again today. And to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Stephen in the live chat. We hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. Turning now to our mission stats as they currently stand with a good liftoff and landing of the first stage booster. That marked the 21st flight of B-1078. This was SpaceX's 490th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 73rd of the year so far. This was the company's 428th Falcon booster reflight, with a launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was the company's 147th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 258th orbital flight from Pad 40 for SpaceX, and the 313th overall orbital launch from this pad as well. Here's where the Falcon family of rockets stands on the year, as seen in this bar chart. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 113th landing of a booster on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas. The 373rd SpaceX drone ship landing, and the 462nd overall SpaceX booster landing to date. Finally, with some industry stats, today's flight was the 50th orbital launch from the Sunshine State, the 77th from U.S. soil, the 85th from a U.S. rocket company, and the 130th overall orbital launch attempt around the world. There have been 3 orbital launch failures on the year so far, and here is where our pie chart now currently stands. And it looks like we've got those launch replays ready for you now. Let's go ahead and start with the pressed site fixed camera view from our Adam Bernstein. Moving on to the wide camera view here at the press site. Onto the turn basin view. Moving on to the south tracker view from our friend Pete Carson's. You can see that shock collar forming around the payload fairings as the Falcon 9 made its ascent, and a little bit of that VAB screech was captured by our microphones here at the press site. Unfortunately, as was thought to be the case, it was a little bit cloudy from further south in Brevard County, so a little bit tricky tracking today. Switching now to Chuck and Jen Briggs' view from down on Merritt Island. And finally, we have Adam's tracking camera view from here at the press site. And that'll go ahead and do it for our live coverage of the Starlink 12-26 mission. Certainly appreciate all of you who have been with us today. Want to thank our moderator in the live chat,